And thanks for coming out this morning. This may not be the only thing, but I think it's the fastest thing. I think it is a doable thing. And it's using royalty oil. It's something that we own, and it's something that we can make use of immediately. So I wrote to Jomo in the introduction. I don't know, Jomo, did you pass this part on to everybody?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You probably were there, the governor at the Chamber of Commerce audience a couple weeks ago, when Bernie stood up and said, what about royalty oil? The governor says, won't it? It's unconstitutional. In many conversations I've had with him, he's dismissed it as unconstitutional. Bud stood up and says, but you can change the premium. That's constitutional. Yes, I can, but I won't until 2014. We changed ACEs within 2 years. We were putting forward some changes, but we won't talk about royalty oil. For some reason, it's an anathema. Don't know what the cloud is hovering over royalty oil, but it should be looked at. If there's some pragmatic reasons, why not? Such as, well, we don't have enough left over after fulfilling Flint Hill's contract, that's one thing. But don't call it unconstitutional if within state statute you have the ability. A Republican governor then tells the group, after I stood up and asked him, a week prior after the Alliance meeting, he met with me and the other two mayors, and he assured us that he would work aggressively with us for the next 4 to 5 months to provide an immediate solution to our heating oil and our energy crisis, fuel crisis. So I stood up and asked him, it's been a week, what have you thought? It doesn't have to be royalty oil, just what? He says there's a little used program that it's underutilized, only 25% of the people are using it, and the people of Fairbanks and the businesses of Fairbanks need to be on it. And he said that program is LIHEAP. Now had he, you know, my jaw dropped and I almost stood up and said, do you know what you just said? Low income home energy assistance program. The businesses don't qualify, and most of the people in that room would not have qualified. And he is saying, we're spending $1 billion to educate our people, and $3 billion right now on the health and social service net. It went up $500 million this last year. $500 million could have built the gas line from Fairbanks to Anchorage via Glen Ellen and Valdez, according to Fauske. But we've been growing our health and social safety net. To what end? Are we educating our kids so that they either leave the state or become wards of the state? We've got to do something that invigorates the economy. I like what Senator Thomas and Senator Thompson tried to do, but it's an expensive alternative. It's a one-time only deal. $500 million can build infrastructure. And my whole idea is, let's do something that stabilizes a region, and not just the interior region, but all those regions that are dependent upon oil derivatives for heating oil and electrification. Those are the only two fuels that I'm saying let's use royalty oil to subsidize, if you want to call it that. Because then you don't give a tax liability to individuals. You are helping employers keep people employed who then can pay their own bills. Well, Jomo, if you can move it, this is where I start from. If you start with a can't, you'll always end with a won't. If you start with a can, you'll always generally find a way to do it. You will do it. Where there's will, there's a way. So this is where we're going. I'll show you the plan overview, plan goal, review of Compton, discussion of maximum benefit, con versus pro, several of those, some of the arguments I get most of the questions, and then long-term goals and recommendations. So that's what I hope to cover in the next few minutes. And if you have something at any time, go ahead and pop it up, and I'm going to try to write down. It's being recorded so that we hopefully can have this discussion. If it's a good discussion, we'll put it on YouTube or something and get it out in the public, because as I mentioned to Jim, I have been to Anchorage a couple times, which is how I got finally a single invitation to be with the governor for 15 minutes. I included the other two mayors, and we got 30 minutes. He's never sat with me alone on this topic. I don't know why. I don't know why we're afraid of this topic. It's got to be explored. But, where was I going with that? I don't know. All right, so let's go to the next slide. Plan overview. The state, I'm proposing, should authorize the sale of royalty oil at a reduced rate for 2 refined products, heating oil and fuels for electrification. Why those 2 products? We know from the studies here, 60% of our heating, our energy costs are heating oil. Electricity is 16% of our costs. So that's 65%, 66%, 75, whatever the math is, 75% of our energy costs are addressed with those 2. How many other communities are in our same boat? Denali Commission has spent hundreds of millions of dollars refurbishing the oil-based storage capacity throughout the rural communities. 185 communities around the state, under 80,000 people, are now receiving, it went from $30 million to $38.5 million for power cost equalization. Power cost equalization is a formula based upon the cost of energy in Anchorage, Chino, and Fairbanks. And yet we are suffering. We've got to address our needs, but in addressing our needs, we're going to address the needs of much of the state, including a little place called Angoon down on the southeast, 35 miles away from hydroelectric lines, and their costs are 65 cents a kilowatt. Hugely expensive, and the mayor down there is begging for relief. This will help him. This will help all those on the Kenai that are using oil-based derivatives. This will help not just the interior. So a lot of people say, well, it's just helping North Pole and Fairbanks. No, it's helping the state. Make a discount available to any in-state refinery. So this would be a separate contract. This would be something that the legislature can authorize if they have to get in. I'm going to propose that perhaps the administration has, by statute authority, the ability to do this. But however we do it, make it available to any refinery that is willing to accept a fixed return on investment and ensure that the discount is carried downstream to the consumer. Now, who taught me this? Kip Knutson. Kip Knutson was working for Tesoro. And in 2010, I was proposing that we take the sales tax off of retail gasoline in North Pole. And at that time, I proposed putting a little excise tax, a fraction of a penny per gallon at the rack. Denali Borough charges 5 cents excise tax a ton on coal and funds their entire operation. A fraction of a penny wouldn't have done anything, but making the oil the same price as it should be in Fairbanks would do everything. However, Kip's taught me a couple of things. Number one, and Kip now works for the governor in his Washington, D.C. office. First thing he said, you can remove the sales tax off of gasoline and we will immediately lower the price. But don't be surprised if within 2 to 3 days, 3 to 5 days, it is immediately back up. I said, why? He said, because 2 reasons. One, market forces. We can't control what happens in the world. Number 2, whatever the market will bear. We're in it for money. You guys are used, you're conditioned to paying a certain price. We're going to go to whatever it will bear. Well, this is a wrong concept to use with owners. You've heard me say it before, I'm sure. A farmer, a dairy farmer doesn't say to his kid who asks him for a glass of milk, you know, well, the kid is thirsty. Roger, you're the kid. And I say, you go milk your cow and then bring it back in. Roger runs out, gets a gallon of milk, says to me, Dad, look at what I've done. I'm so glad. And I look at you and say, Roger, that's good. Now I tell you what, you give me $5 for that gallon of milk. You look at me in alarm and you say, what? It only cost me $3 at Safeway. And besides, I'm in the family. And I say, Roger, you don't understand. It's good for the family budget. It's necessary to charge yourselves more because, after all, you're going to get it back in a dividend. No, what a father is going to say is, look, the family is a small fraction of the market. We'll cover the costs. You'll get it at cost, but you've gone out and milked the cow. What we'll do is we'll charge other people maximum. Instead, we charge, in the oil pricing, we charge people on the west coast of the United States, for instance, less money to refine our oil than we charge in-state refineries to refine our oil. This is completely backwards, and so that is unconstitutional, and we're going to see that in Alaska statutes here tomorrow. So the whole idea is make sure that the family who owns the product, which is guaranteed by the Constitution, the state is the trustee of the resources on behalf of the people. It says the public interest, maximum benefit of the people. It never says maximum benefit of state treasury. It never says state interest. Compton misinterpreted it in his explanation when he said the interest of the state. The Constitution, and Compton had it good in several instances, but in my estimation, he failed when he transliterated the public interest into interest of the state. It is not that. It is the people's resource. Next. So the goal, reduce current heating oil and electricity costs by half, much as what has been talked around this table. And this would be not a one-time issue, it would be a continuing issue, be a temporary path to the bridge. It ends when two things kick in, or one of two things. Either you have a sustainable project, such as trucking of natural gas at an equivalent rate, or you get the market forces drive the price of oil down so that you don't need to subsidize because it's there anyway, okay? So the whole purpose is to stabilize economies. Again, if people can afford to employ somebody, then that person hopefully will be able to pay their bills, and the business will continue to work. Give you an illustration. Power cost equalization prior to 2000 was given to both businesses and consumers in the rural areas. In 2000, it was changed. The rationale was that businesses can pass along the expense. That's a bankrupt theory. I have oftentimes fought against it. Jerry Clearworth and I go round and round. I started a service called Tenant Watch back in the 90s, and many landlords, back in 94, we got the landlord law changed for the first time in a long time. I had 700 customers, different landlords, and they taught me something about their inability to pass along all the expenses. Now, some landlords can, and some landlords can't. And the landlords who can say, well, the landlords who can't, they're just poor business people. Well, maybe, but many businesses in the bush by 2010 had either closed or had seen a loss of their business, a loss of their customers, because when you can't pay your bills and you can't compete with, say, the big package stores who ship stuff up to the bush, then you can't keep on driving up your costs and expect that people are going to buy it. And when people in the area don't have disposable income, they're not going to be buying from you. They're going to go to the cheapest source possible. So Joe has a store, and Jack works for him. And Joe says, "Look, Jack, we've got to cut your hours back because I can't afford to keep the doors open and pay an employee." What does Jack do? Jack immediately becomes a ward of the state. He now applies for all of his benefits because, well, Joe actually fired you. Sorry. So you now are applying for all of these state programs just so that you can feed your family, which is necessary. You have to have it at times. And then you decide that you'd move. Wasilla now has, which is not a historical Native community, now has 10% of their population Native. They are building a Native hospital in Wasilla. I mean, we are changing the demographics, and I think it's intentional by the sound of some of our legislators, so that instead of following the constitutional mandate of the legislature shall provide for the settlement of the land and the utilization of its resources, we are now trying to consolidate the settlement into one location or a couple of locations where it's easy to manage, instead of seeing our vast state and making sure that the development of the resources first benefit the area of settlement. Anchorage has benefited from that. They have natural gas and the rest of the state doesn't necessarily, and they get low pricing, and nothing is stranded if you can make a product out of it, such as fertilizer, and ship it off. It's no longer stranded. So you can't say that's stranded gas, well, but that mechanism continues to enable them to have low cost. But I don't begrudge that. They had natural gas, they used it for their area, they built their city, and their population benefited accordingly. We have a pipeline going by us, the oil pipeline. We should be able to use that to benefit the areas that are affected by oil-derived heating oil and fuels for electricity. And if we do, we have 2 of the 4 refineries in Alaska, right in the North Pole. If we use our refineries properly, Petrostar is an ASRC company. They make 2/3 of our heating oil. They also have a refinery in Valdez. When the governor heard this, because he didn't realize Petrostar was the primary maker of heating oil, he perked up. He doesn't like Flint Hills. Don't know why, that's another story. But whoever does it, this is a path to the bridge. It's temporary. 2 factors. Whenever we get that bridge project, or whenever the market forces brings the price down. It stabilizes, as I mentioned, PCE areas. We're able to do it immediately because there's no infrastructure that needs to be built. Millions have been invested in the infrastructure already. We can use it. It'll reduce the growth of state budget, as I've already described. If you keep people employed, they can usually pay their own bills. If they're paying their own bills, they're not coming to the state for assistance. If they're not coming to the state for assistance, we don't have to have that huge health and social safety net. $2.7 billion alone for Hess's budget, out of $8 billion in anticipated revenues. This is unsustainable. We've got to bring it down, and the best way to do it is by invigorating the private sector. Now, this goes hand in hand with something else, and it isn't today's discussion, but one of the other things, like a fisherman who mends his net, you don't just fix one node and say, well, if I fix this little string here, this little hole in my net, it'll benefit the whole net. Maybe it'll help, but you got to fix multiple little nodes. One of them is permitting mines, because if we permit our mines, 7,000 mineral occurrences between here and the border. I've got a map, I can show you something, but we would have the volume required for a large diameter pipeline, which would give us our natural gas pipeline that much faster. Instead of taking 14 to 28 years to permit a mine, let's take 14 to 28 months and put people to work and invigorate the private sector and make it so that people don't want to work for government because they make more money in the private sector in these mining jobs and so forth, and all the ancillary work that goes with that cluster. It does not provide, it doesn't give a taxing event burden to the citizen who receives it. The one thing about vouchers is that it gives a tax burden, but it doesn't give money. And so we have to be careful about that, because a lot of the people, vouchers are good. I argued if we have to do something, do it by a voucher, because many people can't afford to go to a bank to get a loan. Banks aren't lending these small amounts of money, and they've maxed out their credit cards and everything else. And then on top of it, they have to scrounge up some money to pay Uncle Sam a tax on the benefit that they receive. This does not give a tax burden. I need to go faster. All right. Review of Compton. In this case, I gave you the case here so that you have it. And I don't know if you have the highlighted versions or not. But he highlights several things. The question that he was answering, you'll see it on page 4 and 5. Bottom of page 4. This is important because in interpreting okay, caveat. I almost went to Columbia Law School. I was asked by University of Washington Law School, but I didn't go. I went to seminary instead. I'm a linguist by profession. I'm published as a linguist in Salish dialects. Okay, public disclosure. I was a Russian linguist for the Air Force. Language is something I know a little bit about. But I'm not a lawyer, and I don't play one on TV. So this is a layman's approach to Compton. On the bottom of page 4, the only issue, and what I was going to say is it's important to know what question they're answering, because you can't define everything that they say for all questions. You have to define it to the question that they're answering. The only issues before this court are whether Alaska Constitution Article 8, Sections 2 and 12 and Alaska Statute 3805-180 alpha disallow field cost deductions when royalty is taken in kind and in value, or whether AS 3105-110H on utilization applies to give the state an automatic 1/8 royalty free and clear field costs regardless of other statutes. Now, the reason why I mention this is because when we are asking this question, can maximum benefit be measured by the economic good of the people, or must it be measured by positive impact to the state treasury? Compton wasn't trying to answer that question. But Compton is the only one in the court system, it seems, that addressed the issue of pricing for royalty in kind versus royalty in value. And so we extrapolate from it. But Compton it has been used by successive administrations to say that you cannot sell royalty oil less than, in kind less than in value. And Compton even, and this is why I give it to you, Compton even in his summary says it must be done one way. But just as he leads up to his conclusion, next slide, he says, and I put it on page 19, the state may not take royalty in kind unless after said deductions it will be in the best interest, unless it will be in the best interest of the state to do so, which presumably does not mean exclusively. Presumably means that it will be receiving an amount at least as great as it would if the royalty can be taken in value. This is the only interpretation which would comport with the constitutional requirement that the legislature develop the natural resources for the maximum benefit of its people. The interpretation is now codified in statute. Okay, so this is it will be in the best interest of the state. Well, what is the best interest of the state? He says it is the maximum benefit of the people. The best interest of the state is the public interest. The best interest of the state is to make sure that from our natural resources, the people get maximum benefit. That's all it takes right there. And then he goes on, next page. So right in this room, in 2010, was it December, Chris Escherman was sitting over there. AG Dan Sullivan was sitting about where Jack is. And I asked the question, what about royalty oil? Do we have to translate maximum benefit as maximum dollars to the treasury, or can it be interpreted otherwise in economic terms? And he gave a term, and I forgot what it is, but he said, and many of you were here at that time, he said, yes, it can be interpreted other than maximum benefit to the treasury. And at that time, Chris Escherman said, I've never heard this before. And then we got a couple articles written. So one of them, this was this Alaska Journal of Commerce, but I think you got it in the Clarion. It went all around the state, talking about let's get real maximum benefit from selling royalty oil. You can read that later. But so I raised the question, why not? Why not? If even the AG, then the AG was transferred to DNR, and I've not been able to talk to him since. Senator Coghill was trying to talk to them, and I'm not sure what that meant. AS 3806-070. I put this right in front of you. You've got it, it's colored, and I've also got 3805-183. But it says that the state can change the pricing, and it needs to take a look at impact to the state revenues. It has to look at the source, do we have enough to share? 12.5% of 600,000 barrels. Doesn't give us a huge amount of surplus after fulfilling a contract with the royalty oil user right now. But if we had 2 million barrels of state oil, it would give us significantly more. But do we have the ability now? Instead of saying it's unconstitutional, the governor should be saying, well, let's analyze this. And if it comes down to the fact that, no, we don't have enough to share, then that's a different answer. If it comes to the point of revenues, well, you're going to give the regions affected, and for those of you coming in late, there's all that material on the side. We're not talking just about the interior, that is North Pole and Fairbanks. We're also talking about the 185 communities around Alaska that are on oil-based heating oil and electric fuel generation. So this would be around the state. So considering the idea that, okay, we use the sale of our royalty oil to get us revenues that fund our permanent fund and et cetera, what's the impact on the budget then? Instead of $8 billion in revenue, are we going to go down to 7 or 5 or 6 or whatever? Well, that has to be gauged, and the administration has the tools to properly gauge that. On the back of a napkin around this table, we don't have the tools to know how that impacts the revenues. But it has to be asked and in all the factors. So let's find out. But I say if we're going to spend maybe a reduction of $500,000, I mean, we're not talking a huge market. It is Alaska terms in geographical sense, but in real terms, we're talking about 180,000 people maybe out of 710,000 people in Alaska. We're not talking huge quantities, but it will make a difference for the company that provides it. So it won't make a huge impact, I guess, on our revenue stream. But it will invigorate an economy. It will reduce the stress on our budget because people won't be asking the state for handouts. So it will help out real fast, and again, it doesn't take infrastructure, so it can be done. It says here that it is supposed to look at the projected social impacts of a transaction, that's number 4. And 5B, when it is economically feasible and in the public interest, the board may recommend that to the Commissioner of Natural Resources, as a condition of the sale of oil and gas obtained by the state as royalty, that one, the oil or gas be refined or processed in the state. Well, we got the in-state refineries. 2, the purchaser be a refiner who supplies products to the Alaska market with a price or supply benefits to state citizens. It's already in statute. And again, some of you weren't here. I talked to a senior staffer last week in the legislature. I sent this out. I hope all of you, the legislators, got it. And a senior staffer, someone who everyone else goes to for advice, said, I've never seen this. I know. That's why I'm trying to say it's not unconstitutional. It's in statute. The commissioner can do it. The Oil and Gas Advisory Board. I've been trying to get someone from North Pole and Fairbanks to be on that board who is sympathetic to these ideas so that they can advise the commissioner, because the Oil and Gas Advisory Board can tell the commissioner to change the price. And he can do it. I asked in a Commonwealth North board meeting, ConocoPhillips had their senior man there, and I said, you know about this, right? He says, yes, absolutely. I said, are you guys prepared to accommodate us? He says, it's in statute. 30 days notice, we're ready, we're there for you. And yet we don't do anything. And we allow the administration, successive administrations, to blindly tell us it's unconstitutional. I'm a Christian man, but I don't want to say bullshit, because that's wrong. It's just wrong. So if it's a different argument, identify the real argument. If it's revenues, say, no, we can't afford the revenues. If it's supply, no, we don't have the supply. If it's, I just don't want to do it, then say, I don't want to do it. Start with the won't, and start with the can't, end with the won't. Start with the can, end with the will. So, next. It's in statute. Okay, so AS 3806. Let's talk about the maximum benefit possibilities. I already read it. When it's economically feasible and in the public interest as a condition of the sale of oil or gas obtained by the state as royalty. It has to be refined in state, price benefit to the citizen. It's there, folks. We can do it next. Con versus pro. So let's take a look at some of the pros and cons. The plan is unconstitutional. I hope I've demonstrated there are mechanics. Many of the mechanics are already in place in state statute. The plan does not give each person the same benefit. Well, it never says each person has to have the same benefit. Lieutenant Governor was here and he said, whether you like this or not, here's 2 reasons why your plan won't fly. Number 1, your plan doesn't give an equal dollar to every person in the state. Number 2, your plan, if enacted, will decrease the pain in the interior so that you will not move over to what we want you on, natural gas. I looked at him and said, really? He said, that's not saying this is me personally, I'm just talking for the administration. Guys, if we are being engineered to change, then we are not looking at public interest. We are looking at a state interest or some other interest. We have got to say it is public interest and people interest, not person interest. We, the people, in order to form a more perfect union, is what a preamble to our United States Constitution. It isn't I, the person, in order to do it. It's we collectively, a democratic republic. We've got to learn to act as people. One person can shine like a morning star and the rest of us can say, wow, isn't that wonderful? And applaud. Because next moment, another person can shine like a morning star, but we are coming out of us as people. We elect ourselves from among ourselves, and then we go back to being a regular person after we've served. There should be nobody who defines what happens as far as individual benefit. There should be everything that defines what we do as a state, as people. Next. The plan reduces state revenues. Who knows? If it invigorates the economy, it's going to reduce the size of the budget because it won't have the pressure on the budget to supply what individuals can't do for themselves. Give the people an opportunity to create business enterprise, and the individual will thrive usually. You'll always have to have a safety net. I'm not advocating against that, but it won't be as big, and it can contract quite a bit. Again, we pay $1 billion for education. And then once a kid graduates out of the University of Alaska as a mining engineer, he for the next 14, or she for the next 14 to 28 years, Pogo and Fort Knox, 14 years permit. Kensington Mine, 28 years. How long is it going to get the Pebble Project? Pebble Project is vastly important because if we do not allow the process to work, all mining in Alaska, all resource development in Alaska will be shut down. So we have got to make sure that a kid can get out of college and instead of satisfy the needs of a bureaucracy and the whims of the people who don't like what we're doing, they never create wealth, they never provide opportunity, they never create a job. We've got to create more jobs than just for a government. The plan invigorates the economy. The plan does not incentivize moving to natural gas. Yes, it does, because there should be two elements to this. Again, there should be a time certainness. We do not want to always be subsidized. Anchorage, it could be argued, and we've argued in this room, that it has been subsidized. I don't see that as a sustainable thing. It is only a path to the bridge. You do it to time certain. We get a project that provides us with resources that are affordable, and it has price thresholds. You do it until the market forces themselves drive the price of oil back down to where we can afford to live. Next. The plan restricts free market. No, it doesn't. Because in my scheme, at least, the plan is voluntary. Mark Reischke of Petrostar said, well, I don't like this. You're restricting my return on investment. I said, yes, but what are you wanting more? You want certainty, don't you? You want to know that if you drive up your volume, you've got buyers. So this is going to give you a margin that's built in, and yeah, it's going to be there, but you're going to expand your market. If you take a look at this handout right here, this already shows you, this is out of Commonwealth North. It shows the different routes that are being taken and who supplies the various communities with oil-based fuels right now. So instead of coming from Anacortes, Washington, Mark, if they're coming out of Valdez or North Pole and you're supplying everybody, you've now expanded your market. In ramping up your product, you now within a certain capacity are able to reduce your costs of production. So actually you get a bigger margin, but it's a window of opportunity there. And it isn't a fixed, dollar. It is a fixed, what do you call it, window. So you've got that. Then it's going to expand the market share. So yeah, we're talking maybe 180,000 people, but that's better than what you got right now because you're competing with everybody else. But that must be a very profitable market in many ways because you have a tanker coming in from Russia in the middle of winter to nowhere. You know, so they needed that fuel. They needed it. Well, it creates economies of scale. Again, by ramping it up, you're able to reach this many more people. It makes your operations that more cost effective. Well, I won't get into all of that, but you understand what I'm saying. There's no way to regulate compliance. Yes, there is. The Chinese can back into our super secret technology. A good accountant can back into any person's books and figure out what's going on. As Tesoro, those of you who weren't in the room earlier, Kip Knudsen taught me and his successors, the market has algorithms. The algorithms aren't always right, I'll agree, because Tesoro's algorithms for North Pole, for example, are 2,100 people. And I said, well, this is crazy. The Alaska DOT 2010 figures say that there's 21,000 people going by your store every day in 2010. Not 2,100, 21,000. So you guys, if you were working for me, you'd all be fired because you're leaving money on the table. You're not incentivizing by lowering your price the people stopping in your store so that they'll actually buy more and you'll make more money. You're not doing it. Instead, they're looking at the pump, making sure they don't go over $5. They're not looking around. They're not getting that impulse desire to go in and buy that Slurpee, that beer, that whatever. And you've wasted all this money on all of these special cards you put on top of the gas pump. Well, the same thing, we have algorithms. The industry uses them. We can do it. Smart people, Steve is in the room, he can do it. Hey, Rick Soley's an economist, he can do it. There's a lot of smart people who can figure out these parameters. I don't say he will do it, but. So, all right, next. The process will take too long. It's the shortest way there. Now, do you have to call on the legislature? Maybe. It depends on what all the mechanics are required, but as you see in statute, the administration already has a lot of leeway to do a lot of this stuff. And it could be done before winter. I've been trying to get the governor to look at this long before this time, because if you've got a 30-day window that you have to tell the producers, okay, I'm going to take it in kind instead of in value, that's 30 days. And if we're trying to get it in before the winter freeze, you've got to be doing it before mid-October at least. And so we're mid-September. If the legislature wrangles on it, we've got another 30 days probably. If the administration is wrangling on it, you got another 30 days maybe. So that's 3 months. Well, where are we now? August, September, October. You know, right now is kind of like the deadline to reach law of the bush. But we've got the ability to do it, and it could be done quickly. And even if we can't get to all of those, the bush is still blanketed by PCE. They've got some assistance. We can still do it for 100,000 or more people who can be reached, whether it's the folks in Angoon or it's the people in Fairbanks and North Pole. Right? So long-term goals: stabilize oil-dependent regions in Alaska. Stabilize the economies. Encourage commercial and industrial investments in the affected regions. You look around here and it's like we're Death Valley. You go down to Anchorage and they got cranes all over the place. Why? Because they have a certainty of their energy costs. And the investors are not worried that people are going to move away. They're not worried that the costs are going to go way up. They got what they need to go after the investments. We can increase household disposable income. As you know in this room, that is critical. The more money we take from a household, the less money they spend in the economy. The less money that they spend in the economy, the less they're going to shop at Joe's or Jack's or Steve's or, you know, whomever. It's only a path to the bridge. It is not the solution. It is an interim fix. It is the ability to get through this current weed of hopelessness right now that we're facing, and that a one-time only subsidy or voucher will never fix. It's the only way to make it so that people can say, I can make it through the bridge. But we, the leaders of the community, must work for a sustainable project. That bridge project or that final project. It's got to happen. Next. So my recommendations: urge the governor immediately to initiate an analysis as required by the statutes. The governor could hold a high-level summit with potential stakeholders to work out the ideas. He did this with the production, with the producers. He said, I want to lower the price on the tax, that is, and he brought them all in and said, what do you guys think? And then he comes and, well, he could do this with the Crowleys and the Delta Westerns and PetroStars and Flint Hills. He can do this with all the affected stakeholders. He can bring in legislative leadership, and he says, guys, this is what I want to do. How can we make it happen? It can be done immediately. So that's my presentation. Is it something you can wrap your hands around and at least urge, keep the recommendations updated, and at least urge that these recommendations, I'm not saying buy into the total thing. Again, if it doesn't work for other reasons, let's identify those reasons. But let's leave no stone unturned. Let's not just say, I've done my deed and I'm following some party line or some philosophical idea that it must not ever be done. No, let's investigate it. Let's give it serious analysis. And at the end of the day, if it's doable, do it. If it isn't doable, then at least we've identified why.
Let's get the questions. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Just two things. I have a piece of paper at home with I can't remember which lawyer, if it was from the, what's the name of that lawyer for the state?
The Attorney General?
Yeah, it was either that or something like that, that interpreted Amaretta House to say that everything was cool except you can't just have one person take over the duties of the legislature in lowering the price of oil. So that sheet of paper has a different interpretation than what.
The state established an oil and gas advisory board to advise the commissioner. The commissioner can act upon their recommendations, and it doesn't even take the governor's signature.
Through the board then, okay. So that solves that. And then the other thing is that my thought has always been that it would be way, way simpler. We don't have to get into algorithms or you know, large industrial complex with worldwide you know, subsidiaries hiding holding pockets of expenses that are not showing on the books. If you just went to the distributor level and took all those distributors, their operation every day is very simple. You know, there's only two numbers they deal with. What did they pay for their product and what was their margin they charged for it, 10 cents or 11 cents. So they would volunteer for the programs, they can sell the cheap fuel, and then they would send in their back rate from the last 2 years, which can be easily proved up because we know what the refiner charges and we know what the public's bill is, so there's no way they can lie about it.
Exactly.
So if you do it at the distributor level, there's no other big, you know, trying to figure out the, let them have a profit and blah, 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 and there's only gonna be X hundred, you know, distributors in the whole state, and, you know, they just send that rack rate in and we know, and they prove up their margin, might be seasonally a little bit different, you know, by a penny, who knows, they can prove it up, and then bang, you're ready to go after that.
Yeah, on a layman's side, it seems to be simple, but I won't say that it may have more complexities on the regulatory side. So.
Rick?
Mayor, thank you for your talk. It's clear you did get some benefit off the seminary. But a couple questions. One is, if you're working through this idea of a royalty contract where you've got a reduced return on investment and some kind of discounts, I guess that's a big thing. Can you talk a little bit about how you envision that process and how the vagary of something that we see the benefit in, how that translates, you know, to the consumer? Let's talk a little bit about that.
So, okay, the question again.
I mean, what we want is a cheaper fuel at the
Right.
ownership, right? That's what, or at the
At the
pump, or at Golden Valley's generation plant, or whatever. That's what we're looking for. How just a little bit about how you see this working through.
I'm not exactly sure what price it would have to be sold at. It could be sold at a penny, it could be sold at $1, if I'm answering your question on the side of how does it affect the revenues of the state? What does it need to be priced at to get us half the cost that we're paying now? If we're paying $4 for heating oil, how do we get it to $2? That's part of the analysis that needs to be done to actually determine what that will cost. I don't have that answer, but I just see that those are the part of the question that needs to be answered.
I guess the other one, and you touched on it in your pro-con analysis, the not giving benefit to all people. While that may not be a legal challenge, it certainly is a political one, because the governor and the state has to, and legislators have to be able to explain what they're doing, and they have to be able to justify how. So how does this benefit folks outside of the urban areas? You said 180,000.
You almost asked the exact same question as the CFO of the municipality of Anchorage. She said, well, Mayor, exactly. What do you mean? If you're getting a benefit and we're not, how does that? And I said, well, look, remember that if we have less money being spent on the social safety net, we have more money that can be spent on other things. And I said, you may not need to get the same benefit as we do for heating oil or electricity, but you do have capital projects. So there'll be more money in the budget for you to spend. They like that idea. The idea is, again, it's a maximum benefit of the people. You open up your Constitution, and Article 8, I can open it up, and it says, it is a policy of the state to settle the land and develop the resources. It is in that order. Settle the land. You are to develop the resources to provide for the settlement of the land, wherever it is. If Metlakatla has a resource, Metlakatla benefits from it first, and then the rest of the state benefits. If Anchorage has natural gas, Anchorage benefits first, and then the rest of the state benefits. It isn't necessarily through the state coffers that the benefit has to be derived. It can be through the economic ability for that region to help the other regions. And they are the, 1/3 of their economy is the interior.
And would you envision that benefit, that being sort of analyzed by the administration? That would be part of what they'd be looking at, is the administration would take the lead and say, look, here's the first tier benefit, and it's to these residents who are getting reduced energy costs, but the second tier benefit is this, and to kind of lead the way with a quantitative analysis of where those beneficiaries are and how rural Alaska, Anchorage, and other parts of the state will benefit.
Absolutely, and I want, personally, I want to see the governor succeed. Selfishly, because we cannot afford to wait for another governor to be elected to get maximum benefit to the people and relief to the interior. Anybody who's sitting in there. I want to see the president succeed in enabling individuals to be in control of their own destiny and not government. Now, is he going to go that direction? The president won't, but the governor could. So that analysis is definitely part of what the state should be looking at on the legislature.
You see this as a possible replacement of existing regulation within the energy relief programs? Could that seem to be amended to allow this to occur? That might be a question.
I'm not sure that current programs have to be amended. They just will be underutilized.
Well, could they be changed to the point of using more of a voucher system than what's given at this point, to make it more simplistic in the process?
My understanding is they don't need to be changed necessarily. This is different. This is going after regional stability rather than individual security. Okay.
Just, I agree with you, and that's part of the reason that the voucher bill, and I'll just do this briefly, was even initiated. And as you can see, it's not by coincidence that it references fiscal year 2014, the next time that the contract will be up for negotiation.
And that's on his Senate Bill 203.
And that is the reason for actually that committee that exists now, is to go back through these cases and determine. We've been arguing for 30 years, and then I agree with you. The subsidy for natural gas out of Cook Inlet is almost a negative for the state of Alaska. It costs us $40 to $100 million a year for the gas that's being produced there, rather than a revenue base. It's the other way around. So that is what we're
look what it
attempting
did
to
to
do.
the economy of the area and the ability of people to pay their bills.
And that's fine. We don't have any problem with that. We're just saying there should be an equity here based on that. We expect to explore that and get that on the table for the governor to review. And you're right, he should be instituting a group or a panel or something, or at least having the contracts out, like he does now have a contract out to take a look at at the reality of what's taking place at Prudhoe Bay and the impact that the state's oil taxation has. So you're right, nothing wrong with it, and we'll keep pressing forward, but I appreciate your going through it and your meeting with the governor and trying to get him to think a little more progressively.
Lisa?
To your question, think about it this way, what does the state spend on per capita? You know, it's 117,000 per citizen per year. And when you think about it and look at the capital projects, you know, it's all to special interest groups. You know, so this, you might say it's a special interest group, those who use petrol, but everyone uses it, whether they just drive a snow machine in the bush or, you know, fly in the bush, whatever. And so another thing that you could do to make it completely broad-based and have buy-in from South Central is to have it for all petrol products, in other words, gasoline and diesel as well, because lots of the other parts of the state are hurting from trying to fill their boats with diesel that could go sky high. There was already a fishing boat that tried to shoot a tanker in the Straits of Hormuz just the other day to make a big oil slick that would have then, you know, allowed things to explode and tried to shut down the Straits of Hormuz. That just happened 2 days ago. So at any point, diesel could go to $8–10 and wipe out businesses wholesale with nothing as a backstop, nothing in place. Meanwhile, we're sitting on $82 billion in the state, total holdings in every slush pile. And what the cost of this would be about $1 billion, and I take that from all the fiscal notes of all the past energy relief programs or bills that were issued in the past 4 years. When you compile them, you can see that to take care of every petrol drop, gasoline and diesel, you know, to reduce everything by half, would be about $1 billion for the whole state. So that would be the best spent $1 billion that we could possibly do. Meanwhile, we don't have anything really to spend the money on because the bullet line would be paid for by, or built by the bond market and paid for by the take-and-pay customers. And then the $400 million design money would have been paid for by taxes. So basically you have a free pipeline. So sitting is not for 7 years. There's nothing really to spend the money on at the moment. Meanwhile, you know, the governor's been trying to give $2 billion back per year to the producers. But the reason they don't uncap their wells and pop things in the pipeline is because there's no gas line. And when they unearth and uncap those wells and the oil comes out, they've got gas they don't know what to do with. So they're hanging until they know what plan they have, and then they're going to do their production and feeder lines in concert with having a gas line to put it in. Otherwise, it makes no sense to waste it.
Lisa,
So
let's try to keep to the presentation, and there's other questions that people want to ask, so.
Okay, one more thing is that the state, because of our constitution, it's a fiduciary relationship we have. We have a unique constitution, and the state is acting as a fiduciary. We are the owners of the petroleum, and so the state's been a bad fiduciary with us desettling, so we need to change the minds of people to realize that with this one aspect only, the state's been our fiduciary. They're not the owners. They're sitting there holding on to all these billions that came in because of ACES, because of Palin, and this distribution will be, you know, the best economic program that you could possibly induce.
I just, you know, I think this is definitely a situation where the devil will be in the details. You know, if there's some sort of alteration of royalty oil, you know, the trouble is how crude oil is converted to final product is complicated. I mean, the refinery here uses a lot of oil to make that conversion. Probably the one in Kenai uses natural gas. And so, and I don't know what the situation with is in Valdez. They probably use oil there too for refining. So I just think it's complicated to convert royalty oil into heating oil. And so anyway, I just point that out. I think it's going to be a complicated formula if you try to manipulate the price of crude oil going into this industry to affect the price of heating oil or other products coming out.
Definitely something that has to be looked into. I don't think it's as complicated as you're thinking right now in my discussion with the refineries, but definitely that's in the mix.
It seems like at the very least you'd have to have some sort of a you know, at least a rough note of 1 barrel in gets you half a barrel out of refined product, some sort of a ratio so that different refiners know there's a different pathway to that final product.
And that's what I'm saying, the state has all of these type of different
Yeah.
digits that need to be considered in a
But,
matrix.
you know, other than the Amaretta Hess case and other complexities of doing this with royalty oil, it certainly seems there's plenty of precedent. I mean, what is PCE? It's something just like this. And the subsidy that apparently Anchorage enjoys for natural gas is just like this. And so it doesn't seem to me that it sets any sort of precedent that hasn't already been set and lived on for years and years in other forms in the state.
So the devil's in the details and the devil's in the politics. And if you figure those two things out, you can do this. I mean, you know.
And more it's in the politics.
And those are both pretty high hurdles, and we haven't been able to overcome them. It was only 8 years ago that the then governor, in a wholly different kind of economic, fiscal, political kind of climate, was insisting on the premium. And we all knew that governor, and probably many folks supported what he was doing at the time. That was Governor Murkowski, and it was the interpretation. And so, you know, that was an interpretation then, and things can change. And so we got to develop a consensus here. We got to convince folks, because I don't think our senator, this can't be a Lone Ranger then. This has got to be a statewide solution, and you have to figure out how Bush would support it, and to help them understand that it is a equitable way to deal with ours, and wrap, whether PCEs wrap directly into it, I don't know, but I think you gotta address all that.
And Al Kukish had mentioned that, you know, he's also, besides being a senator, one of the chairs of AFN. And he had said, well, Mayor, how are we going to get this out there? And I said, you know, that's not the issue. You've already got established lines. The issue is, are you going to be able to get it at a lower cost from an in-state refinery, or is the lower cost going to be from employees of a refinery out of state?
Gene?
Just, Doug, when you talk about the commissioner has the power to reduce the price, I mean, could you just touch on that again? Because I think perhaps he does for 12 months. If it goes anything beyond 12 months, it has to go back to the legislature. Otherwise, you'd have the legislature's voting on it, approving a royalty contract, and the commissioner then could just, the administration undo it.
Yeah.
Or undo it 12 months and another 12 months and another, and the court's not going to allow that. So no matter what, you have to go back to the legislature,
Yes,
unless you only want something for 12 months or less.
The idea of immediacy is what I believe the administration has in its ability right now. They could do something right now, but yes, ultimately, and that's why I put on here, ultimately the legislature is going to have to be involved. So bring them in at the very beginning and say, here's what I'm planning to do. Is it doable in your estimation on a long-term basis? But again, we don't want it long-term, multi-decade. We're talking bridge projects here. It is the path to the bridge, and then it terminates. So you made a great point, and that's part of the detail.
And then here it says on the language here in statute, the purchaser, be a refiner, supplies products to the Alaska market with the price of supply benefit. It seems like you need to change that to say with a markup of no more than 10%. Okay, and this is all requirements of the refiner that gets the oil and turns it into a product. But I don't buy oil from Flint Hills. I buy it from, you know, a couple people down the supply chain. How are you going to make sure that every one of those people then is restricted to what, a 5% markup, no more than 5% markup? And every shipper out to Bush, Alaska, you're going to have to restrict their profit too. So when I reviewed this back when I was in the legislature, I couldn't figure out how to control it unless the state took over that entire supply chain. There was no way that you could guarantee that the benefit that you gave to the refiner actually flowed through to my burner tip.
Unless the contracts that were written from now on included a provision such as that. I don't think you have to change the statute to have all the details. The statute gives, as you know, the general idea, and then the agency can apply that principle in contracts. So, I mean, I had a state employee come up to me and said, have you looked at the Kazakhstan model? And somewhat, it's not totally state-run, it's got a lot of public-private thing, but the requirement is you have to refine it in-state, it has to be sold in-state at a certain amount, and then whatever you take out of state, that's your business. And that's applying the principle of benefit to the people, supply to the people. So you're much more knowledgeable on this than I am on mechanics, and that's what we need, is the knowledgeable people who know the ins and outs, but who start with an idea that's saying, we can do this, let's find a way to do it. Instead of, well, let's just brush this aside because it's too difficult, I don't want to think about it, or whatever. You know what I'm
Roger,
saying?
then Jack.
Well, I like the idea of, what you have there is just developing the mechanics. The one thing I like about it, though, is that we're going to try to put in some sort of mechanism that once things stabilize or other sources of energy became available, that would be phased out. And I think that's the reasonable approach to take.
And that's the only thing I can see a refinery not really wanting to bite into, is they know that they will have, in some instances, a decade, like say with the rural areas, because they're going to be the last to benefit from propane delivery or natural gas. But they know then that a bigger part of their market, say 100,000, is going to drop off if they get another project. So they get to have certainty for a few years. How many years is that? I can see that as if I was a businessman making the decision, that would be my point of concern.
Jack?
So, talking about the path to the bridge, I think that if this is implemented, it will actually be the bridge. Because it will, in some respects, what you're talking about is destroy the incentive, to bring natural gas to the community as a bridge. Eventually, natural gas comes to the community, as a large diameter pipeline or a bullet line or something like that. That's the ultimate goal, and I don't think it will detract from that ultimate goal. But it could become the bridge to that goal, and I don't know that there's anything wrong with that either.
It may, because it may be less expensive.
Yeah, that's right. Where's the incentive anymore for the community? If the community is now getting $2 fuel oil, where's the incentive then to push a trucking project? If GVA is getting $2 oil to run their generators, where's the incentive for them to truck, so on and so forth. So I'm not saying that's a bad idea, but it may be the bridge rather than the path to the bridge.
And it may be, but here's the incentive to continue on. We know the aggressive fluctuation of the oil commodities market, and so we know that even though the price goes down and we get relief, 2008 came and went, and 2012 came with a vengeance. So we will still want to, as leaders, be pushing that other solution.
Yeah, but leaders don't push the thing. It's the public that pushes the thing. And when the public no longer, when the public has $2 fuel oil, a lot of this is like that. The second thing is, and this is what goes to what Gene was saying, is that I'm concerned about our ability to actually regulate the price all the way to the burner tip. Refinery, fine, but the refinery passes it on to, and the chain gets even longer the further you get away from the refinery. And so you're not just doing one, you're doing the shipper and then the guy that's actually buying from the shipper and so on and so forth.
But the governor could bring them all into the room.
That's a lot. So I'm one, and I understand the difficulty with a voucher type system because of the fact then it's cash that gets taxed. But maybe that's in reality, although there's a disadvantage to that, seems to me to be hugely simpler for me as a consumer to send my bills, paid bills, to the government and get a rebate.
Then you're going to be taxed.
That's right. But that's the downside of that.
We don't want to make simplicity. That also increases bureaucracy, that enlarges the size of government, and it doesn't reduce the size, which is, we have to look at the budget. It's not sustainable right now.
Yeah. I'm not so sure it increases the size of government any more than trying to regulate all of these entities.
Well, that's something then that could be considered in the details.
I think that, it seems to me that a rebate system almost is simpler and less bureaucracy than trying to regulate, you know, all of these, you know, various entities on down the line, so.
Joe, and that's Steve.
And I just wanted to emphasize that, and Jack did a good job of it. What Gene said is very accurate, trying to follow that chain all the way and make sure everybody abides by that percentage that is reduced is a difficult situation. And the vouchers were at least a short-term situation as they were intended, but it was intended, as Section 2 of the bill said, to inject the governor into the process of trying to reduce things so he could look at it and say, gas doesn't need to be supplemented, this doesn't have to be done, that doesn't have to be done. It would shrink down that voucher system dramatically, and also it would have an impact, and the numbers of folks in government. We looked very carefully at that, and they had some increases for the people that were going to oversee the program, but it was minimal numbers. It was, you know, it was not a big addition to government.
Steve?
Yeah, you know, down in Juneau this last winter, we tried to get Flint Hills, GVEA, and Fairbanks Natural Gas together, and come up with a solution to give some state money to build the electrification plant on the slope. Flint Hills came back and said, no, if there's any state money involved, we don't want to have anything to do with it. We will build our own, we will take care of our own, but we do not want any state money involved. We will not get involved if there's state money involved, because they don't want to have to open their books to some kind of regulation, some kind of regulatory watching over. So how is this going to work if they refuse to do that? And they say, hey, we'll buy the oil at the same price that we're buying it today from the producers, and you guys can figure out what you want to do, sell your oil in the lower 48 and keep your profit. But we are not going to open our books for...
That's a great question, and I agree. They should not have to open their books because they're a private company and the state wants them to open up the whole system. They don't need to. Here's what you're asking a different question than what experience teaches us happens right now. They are already buying royalty oil from the state. What they would be doing if they were one of these people, and they don't have to do it, it's voluntary, but they would be buying at a lesser rate, and then the compliance mechanism is, okay, if you're buying it at this rate and the consumer's supposed to get it at this rate, is the consumer getting it at this rate? If they're not, then the questions fly. But if they are, everything's peace and harmony in America. So, you know, I mean, that's the details of the algorithm that they use for compliance. But it isn't that the state money is going to be involved as much as the state has lowered the cost of what they're purchasing.
Flint Hills has already made the statement that if they get natural gas and it's going to reduce their production costs, we're not going to see a reduction in our cost of gasoline. Because then they will just be making enough profit to stay in business and maybe keep all 3 towers going or 2 instead of just 1. And they've made that statement. Reduce our costs, you aren't going to see a benefit.
And they may not be one of them who does this. Again, I mentioned Petrostar because Flint Hills only makes 1/3 of our heating oil.
Right.
Petrostar makes 2/3. And Petrostar has 2 refineries that are better placed to be taking advantage of this. And this is why I'm saying this is not with a current royalty oil contract. This is a different opportunity for refineries if they want to do it and if they see the benefit. So I'm not going to argue for or against Flint Hills. I'm just going to say for or against the concept, and let's pursue it with those who want to do it.
Dan?
Thank you. This is like a breath of fresh air. I think we all know, we all feel a driving need for some relief.
Oh, yeah.
And we send our legislators down there and say, fix this. And they say, well, what do you want? Well, he wants this, and he wants that, and he wants the other, and we can't get that way. Well, you're supposed to fix it. And this thing has holes in it. It scares the bejeebers out of me. How are we going to get that translated from reduction to rate? But I think it's an idea we can't get behind, and let's iron out those details and make we got to have something that we can send them down there to get for us.
Yeah.
And this is as close as I've seen. It's got holes, it ain't perfect. And I hope every bad question you've heard here encourages you to go figure a way you answer that in the next presentation rather than backing off and saying, hey, I buy it, I think.
Steve?
I was involved in the conversations that Governor Palin had when she was putting together that whole energy relief package, or whatever you call it. And we had this discussion. They were trying to figure out how do you regulate through the whole chain. And it got kicked to the curb for that reason. The other problem is that they stumbled against equity across the state, because right now, the Zocals taught us very well that it has to be equal to the whole state. You can't just make, I understood what you said, but you can't just say, oh yeah, you guys are happy and fair, thanks, but Anchorage, one guy in Anchorage can drop a lawsuit in, and you're dead. And so the goal became, how can we get something out that won't be challenged? And because we didn't want to go to court forever either. So that's how we ended up with that number. It was going to be higher than that because it was going to include like an oil subsidy piece.
How does the PCE withstand that test though?
It's a straight subsidy.
PCE is a straight up subsidy. And the history of PCE is that you got PCE because we were planning to build a SIP.
Yeah, but it's not equal. I mean, it doesn't benefit everybody equally. So it seems like the Zocals shoot that down in a second.
But I think
But
this
they
is where
did.
the governor
But
could
they
go
did
to
the
the Supreme
trade-off.
Court and say, ask this question about, each specific part, and then give us a constitutionality test on this, and that would be proper.
I guess
Would it
not.
be immediate then? Maybe not.
Yeah, I'm not a constitutional guy at all, but here's my other point. You don't want to build a bridge. I want to know what the part pure of the bridge looks like. And as I listen to your talk, if you wanted to spark the economy, you wanted to keep people employed, you wanted to have opportunities and build wealth. Great targets. The problem is, I don't see this moving us that direction, specifically in rural Alaska. You send this money to rural Alaska, they'll spend it, didn't create a single job. Because there's
I'm
no
not sending,
jobs out
I'm
there.
not sending money. I'm sending
Survival.
fuel at a reduced cost.
I understand.
And that's
You're gonna
stabilized.
send them fuel at a reduced cost. And you mentioned Mayor Howard and Goon earlier. 87% unemployment. They can't afford to pay even half the bill. So how does that spark the economy? It doesn't. Especially, I'm just talking rural Alaska. Maybe
It will
it'll
induce
help.
investment into an area. People have disposable income because they're not spending it all on one, energy cost. Then they've got more money all around. And entrepreneurs always come when they smell fresh money.
Okay,
That's
if
just-
you're in Antioch, what investor's gonna come to Antioch?
I don't know. But I'm not going to limit their possibility. I'm not going to say no for them. I do know that when I was chair of the Economic Development Committee before it was merged with FIDC that created FEDC, we had 3 rural-urban economic summits, 3 consecutive years. And we saw that by helping the rural communities create business plans and show the interconnectedness of their communities, they started getting business plans and they started growing some businesses. Now that's tapered off in somewhat, and other economics have come in. But I know this, that when you give them an opportunity and you point the way, they will pick up on it, and they do create businesses, and stuff happens. Good stuff happens.
Dan White, MG. Sending fuel at a reduced cost, assuming that you could manage that whole supply chain. That then businesses can take advantage of, right? That's not just for.
That's right, everybody.
So those are fundamentally different, that and vouchers are fundamentally different approaches. The voucher says, well, 250 gallons of relief gives me more spending money. Sending fuel at a reduced cost affects the whole business's balance sheet, and it seems like that, at least it's something that you could manage all of that. That has a much bigger opportunity to stimulate economic development, because it affects a business's balance sheet, which affects hiring and income into the community and for our wealth creation. The voucher, a business couldn't take advantage of, I'm assuming.
Did you, right now, Petrostar refines their own oil. They're integrated. Did they give you any indication that they would sell their royalty oil, or sell their oil on the open market, buy royalty, and actually reduce price? Or do they want to continue to refine their oil, get top dollar and for it, and and sell product at top dollar. I'm not
I've-
sure that they would move away
That's a
from
great
that.
question. I've only had a limited conversation with Petrostar, and I told the governor specifically because there's so many other mechanics in this that it'd be more appropriate for him to engage them in the details. But just on a businessman level, yeah, if I could get a product cheaper to satisfy a certain market, I'm gonna use that, and I'm gonna utilize my other for best return on investment. It's just like why is WTI sending stuff over to the West Coast and then monetizing it based on ANS? You know, I mean, they're making it at $100 or whatever, and they're selling it at 120 based upon ours because the West Coast market is tied to us. It's on that same principle.
Lisa?
So you can bypass all these problems by, number one, you have it be for 3 years with 2 renewals. So everyone knows they need to, you know, use this now, but move over to gas, and you maybe even put it in the same bill as when we asked for $1 billion line of credit to get in the distribution and the Northville plant, you know, have this gas authority, Goldenheart Gas Authority, because we can't be certain that any private entity is going to pass on the discount to us. We need to take this into our own hands, and so everyone knows it's, you know, temporary. And then you take it out of the general fund, so you just get over the hump of people saying, well, you're taking over private businesses, this is against capitalism, that's communist, it's takeover. You force them to open their books, no, even if you're not, that will be the talk. So you just take it out of the general fund as an appropriation. Never talk about royalty oil. Just have it be an appropriation of $1 billion, just like any other, you know, batting cages and catch can. And
The only thing I'm trying to do is, I'm trying to do something different than that. I'm trying to avoid appropriations out of the general fund, because I don't want to increase the state's expenditures, state budget. I'm trying to reduce the size of the budget, make it more sustainable, but it does affect the revenues coming in.
Right.
But I'm trying to do it before it hits the bureaucracy.
I understand that's a good point, except that then you've got to follow that supply chain, whereas if you do it at the distributor level, it's totally, completely clean, there's nothing else to think about. You just say, fuel is $2.
That's a good point.
And the subsidy comes from the state, and it will come exact in proportion to, you know, match the difference between market and what they sell it for, and there's no other consideration. Very clean, there's nothing to think about. And completely simple, it's a simple math, subtraction, calculation. You know, they buy it by the big tanker, they know what they sell it for, nothing to think about. So the loss to the state is the same, except you don't have to do all that, you know, analysis and tracking and regulating and blah, 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 on and on and on. So if you do it at the distributor level, and then once again, if we add in gasoline and diesel, then the whole state will want it, because, you know, they put it in their boats, their trucks, their snow machines, except for avgas, not avgas, but, or jet fuel. But unless you want to, you know, it wouldn't help the airlines, it wouldn't subsidize Alaska Airlines, but anyway. So you got, and the one last thing is that in the bush, in 10 years, they should be able to buy tiny nuclear cogeneration units and whatever, you know, things are coming on the market, you know, we might be on crystal power by then, who knows? You know, so it's like, you know, as we allow them to have money, they can buy those things, you know, so.
Good. Thanks.
Okay.
One last,
Just to sort of monitor some economic channels for kicks. They're interviewing a capital management specialist, a hedge fund manager in California, who actually likes what he's calling not green energies now, he calls them advanced energies. And there's a new Proposition 27 he's pushing for in California. And he's saying by shifting the dynamics of a certain movement of capital in the state of California, it would create new jobs, even building new windmills, whatever it may be. It also uses natural gas systems. I haven't looked into in detail. To accomplish it without subsidies, American ingenuity, and return on capital. So that got my attention from, here's a hedge fund manager, a true capitalist, who's for green energies if you wish. He's changing the dynamic and trying to change the tax structure in California to allow no subsidies, American ingenuity, and return on capital to create jobs. So this is a man coming up with a bridge solution to California, which is a very strange paradigm that you don't hear very often. So I'm wondering, what is this Prop 27? I haven't seen the weeds, haven't had a chance to look at it. I just overheard it on the radio.
Interesting.
So,
Well,
Any
thank
other
you.
question, Joel?
Just a statement. The commonality between what you're proposing, the voucher program, what Pastor Van had been talking about, and Lisa regarding just the buy down, is it answers a question that the administration and certainly folks outside of Fairbanks, or outside of Anchorage, are very interested to have answered, but it seems that people in Anchorage are very interested in not having answered. And that is, how much money are we pumping into the state treasury off of our own citizens? It's, you know, the catchphrase I like to use is taxed into the poorhouse for your maximum benefit. So that's one commonality of all of these proposals. It helps put the finger on the value of dollars flowing into the state treasury off of the citizenry itself. So I don't know which proposal folks would want to run with, but I think that would be a very good benefit of all three.
Well, and here's our opportunity, is folks in Anchorage, presiding officer of the Assembly, Anchorage Economic Development, Commonwealth North, Institute of North, all these agencies and so forth, are willing to join with us in exploring this. Everyone says, great, let's explore. That's what my ask is, if this group will urge the governor to explore this. Leave it, you know, uncover it for the real issues and not just, you know, say it's unconstitutional. The administration or the legislature is equipped to determine constitutionality questions, and it's the judiciary. So let the administration and the legislature determine those questions that are really definitive for whether or not to implement this. And then send the questions that they need to the judiciary for determination. But we need to do it to move the state forward, whatever system we develop. We've got to settle these questions.
Good. Thank you.
Thanks, Doug.
Great presentation, you did a good job.
Yeah.
And give us a lot. Appreciate it.